Hi, everybody. I'm Ralph Ben Murgy, and this is Not That Kind of Rabbi. By the way, for those of you interested in supporting Not That Kind of Rabbi, I'm on Patreon now. I've finally made the move to Patreon. So I'm at patreon.com/NTKR, Not That Kind of Rabbi, NTKR. So if you're all inclined, we have different tiers. I've learned all this. There are different tiers where you can support it, either the smallest amount or the largest amount. They're all fantastic as far as I'm concerned. I love doing this, and I want to be able to do more of it and more regularly, and not just twice a month, but 4 times a month. And to get there, I need your help. So if you're interested in becoming a Patreon, devotee, supporter, donator, patreon.com, patreon.com at NTKR. And I'll thank you in many ways. I have a blog. I put out the first blog. Is God a 4-letter word? And I've always thought about this one. At the beginning, I talk about if you're at a dinner, the best way to have a buzzkill is to say God and actually mean it. People are, at that point, it's like when I say that I come from a religious home and I am in my way religious, not just spiritual, but religious. People think I just said I'm nuts because we've taken religion and turned it into the extreme fringes of religion and have every religion defined by it. If you want a picture in a media piece, in the news piece about Jews like myself, they won't look like me. They'll look like Sturmel hats and black hats and long coats and payas, and they'll look like the one version, the ultra orthodox version of a Jew, because there's no mistaking you're looking at a Jewish person. I have at times in my life worn my kippah, while walking around in regular society, 83% Christian in Canadian terms. And it's a remarkable experience because you are now all Jews. So if I spit on the sidewalk as I'm walking and someone sees it and sees my yarmulke, my kippah on my head, they now assume all Jews spit on the sidewalk. If I'm losing my temper in a parking lot, then I'm that kind of person. And that kind of person is a Jew because I'm wearing my kippah. So you represent at that point, but you also are aware that everybody knows you've made a statement, that you are saying, I am of something, like a Sikh wearing a turban. I once did a phone-in show. I tried a few days of private radio years ago for CFRB in Toronto, and I did a phone-in. And it was at the time, if you'll remember, if you're old enough, that there was a big kerfuffle at the Legion halls because they insisted that Sikhs who had served should take off their turbans when they come into the Legion hall, because it was a sign of respect. And I spent 2 hours on the radio repeating the words, it's not a hat, because they kept saying you should take off your hat as a sign of respect. It's not a hat. A turban is not a hat. It's a religious symbol, one of several that Sikhs wear on their body. So, it's a misunderstood thing. I always say, and I've said before in this show, that spirituality is a relationship issue between you and yourself, you and the other, Martin Buber's I and thou, and you and the cosmos in its unknowable entirety. Religion is a fitness program. If you want to have a spiritual six-pack, you got to actually work out. So religion gives you an opportunity to say, you know what, if I actually think this is real, then every Friday, an hour after the sun goes down, to every Saturday, an hour after the sun goes down, it's Sabbath. For people who follow religion, it's not, maybe this Friday I'll do it. You do it. But what do you get? You get an opportunity to go from doing for 6 days to being for a day. So there are things built into the structural piece, the rituals, when we are born, when we reach of age, when we die, when we're married. These are all things that, given a certain structure, we can work within it. That's not to say that I support patriarchy in religion or that I support ridiculous notions of right and certitude in religion. What I do support is exploration. The mystery is what I care about. There's a Kabbalistic view of four worlds that we live in at all times. Our body, Asiya, our heart, Yetzirah, our brain, Bria, and the spiritual destination, Atzilut. And everybody has all four at their disposal, but integrating them into a whole person, not living in one way more than others, is the task at hand in the Kabbalistic world, is that balance, that ability to balance things out. Another example is the idea of compassion. Compassion is not just kindness. I'm really kind to people, so I'm compassionate. It requires kindness, hesed, and it requires strength, gevura. Forget the Hebrew terms if you're not into the Hebrew thing. But those two things have to work in tandem with each other. You have to be able to be kind, but you have to be able to have boundaries. You don't just have everybody come into the house, but you do sometimes have someone come into the house. And it works. So the more I think about it, the more these are coping tools for me in a pandemic, and for you, I hope. Find your coping tools. If it's sitting in meditation or getting one of the apps with a guided meditation to calm your nerves as you hear nothing but catastrophic news around you, remember, you can find within all great religions, within all wisdom paths, within humanism, all of it, there are structures that help you to cope with life in its way. So check out the blog, go to patreon.com/NTKR if you want to support me. Is God a four-letter word is my first blog out on the Patreon site. And I hope you can do that. I also want to tell you that I have a great guest. Sometimes I have a great guest. So I have a great guest. So in this case, I have somebody who you would think being a writer was enough, but apparently not. A writer, a composer, a multimedia, not multimedia, which I will discuss, a human being who has won accolades, granted. Yiddish for Pirates was a book that won the Stephen Leacock Medal for Humor. His latest book, he's a poet as well, okay, and composer, and PhD, and teacher. So I find people like this incredibly obnoxious. I can't do these things, but nonetheless, he can. Go to his website. There's some beautiful things there. He has taken the alphabet in Hebrew, and turned them into art that is stunning, just beautiful. I love it. I tried not to look at which letter it was so I could figure out, what am I looking at? Is that Zion? I don't know. I think that one is. Yeah, that one's obvious. All right. Is that a cuff? I loved it. I had a great time. His latest book, Nothing the Same, Everything Haunted, the Ballad of Motl the Cowboy. I just finished reading it, and there's so much to talk about in that, but there's just so much to talk about, period. I'm talking about Gary Barwin. Hello.
Hello, it's lovely to be here.
I'm very happy that you decided to do it. We live in the same city.
Yeah, I think I've seen you in the city once or twice only, just walking around or at an event or something. I don't know how that happens, but that's, yeah. But so it's nice to see you over Zoom.
Over pandemic Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll try to do this thing in human terms someday. You'll come over for a Friday night dinner, I hope.
Oh, no, that sounds lovely.
All right, so there's a lot I want to talk about, but I want to start with your sense of storytelling because of the fact that you seem agnostic to genre. It's whatever idea generates whatever format.
Yeah.
Am I right in that?
Well, certainly, yeah. I mean, or maybe and sometimes I would see it the other way around, which is the format generates the ideas too. There's an interplay between, what can be said and, what the possibilities, the affordances of the medium are, and then what that, in kind of dialogue with that, what comes out, I think.
Yes.
you know.
So when you choose, or does it choose you?
Yeah, I think it's some combination. I mean, no question. I don't just say one day I'm going to sit down and write a novel, like or I mean, I sit down and think I'm going to write a poem, and it comes out to be a novel. That doesn't happen because you don't say I'm going to go. I'm going to do some jumping jacks, and you end up doing a marathon. Like that's I don't think. I mean, I don't do either. So this is highly theoretical. But some things you have to plan. But basically, I mean, so there's a lot of play. I sit down just to make something, and I'm trying to be aware of the thoughts and feelings and just things that are swirling around inside me, around me, and then start making something. So things can jump from one thing to the other. I think it's going to be something, and then it turns out to be something else.
Mm,
Absolutely.
mm.
And I think that I talk about the writing knows more than I do, so that I try and follow the writing and let it lead me, because it's a kind of like it's like dowsing, right? It kind of leads me to a place, and it's this interaction between me being sensitive to the work, sensitive to the process, I guess.
Making yourself available.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right. I mean, it's like that kind of being in the kind of creative zone, so you're ready to jump wherever it takes you.
Um, who was it? Eat, Pray, Love. Elizabeth Gilbert, I think that's her name.
Mm-hmm.
She spoke at one point about um, there's she's sitting in the room, the writing room, and really sometimes creative inspiration just gallops by, and it's a question of whether you're available to get on that horse, or if you just aren't available and it goes right by you.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I don't think I'd be Eat, Pray, Love. I'd be like Coffee, Coffee, Right. Maybe that would be my memoir. But um, yeah, no, I mean, I like that. And one thing that I thought about, especially when dealing with heavy subjects, Sheila Heti, the novelist, was talking about thinking about who you're going to be when you finish writing. She's talking about a novel, and in that sense, it's like, okay, I'm thinking of this novel I just finished was about the Holocaust. It's like, okay, am I up to knowing I'm embarking on that journey?
Yeah.
Am I have to be willing to, I mean, if it's calling me to do that, or if I'm engaged in thinking about that, I have to be able to bring really my fullest self to that. It's not something you can just dabble in a way.
Yeah.
I started writing a short story it was going to be a novel, and then it just became a short story where my initial idea for this novel was I had this couple finds this, they think it's like a little mouse or a little lost bird, and they go and they take it and they put it in a little box, and they look after it, and they discover it's Hitler's mustache. So it's left Hitler, and it's traveled the world, and it's gone through all these different experiences, and I thought, okay, that's the way to tell. And then I realized, no, that's not going to bring me to the place I need to be in terms of my deepest engagement with the subject.
Yeah.
And it wasn't asking me to do more than this sort of interesting story, but not enough. It's not taking me deep enough to do what I needed to do, or what I ought to do with, and what I was being called to do with, the Holocaust and genocide.
So let's get to that.
Yeah, that's everything. You talk about Holocaust, and everything always ends up in Hitler. What is that? That's the what's this like on the internet?
Yeah.
What's anyway?
Yeah, there's that thing, that phenomena that eventually it reduces itself to Hitler.
Yeah.
But for me, certain parts of the book, well, put it this way, what has been your relationship to the Holocaust throughout your life?
So my grandparents, 3 out of the 4 of them, left Lithuania when they were about 18, right in the 30s, so right before the Holocaust. And then my other grandmother, her parents had left, and they all went to South Africa. So I knew that they all had just got out in time, basically, but I also knew that the rest of their family didn't. So what I knew was that my parent, my grandparents didn't talk about it, and my grandfather, though he spent lots of time, he was spent lots of time learning about Jewishness and Judaism and history, and had spent lots of time looking for relatives that were either gone or scattered. As a result, he would not talk about it. And I remember kind of asking him, kind of probing to try to find out about it, and he would never talk about it. And I thought about when I got married about 33 years ago. there was a wedding video, and he was asked, to speak, and he knew that on the video, he knew that this was sort of like a document for the life of the family. And I had never heard him speak like this, but he like looked into the camera with just unbelievable pain and said, like, we lived beside the Lithuanians for hundreds of years, and they and they betrayed us. And just that one, it was only a second, but that just struck me so incredibly deeply to see, like, that was the first time he had revealed the depth of his feeling, And so and I thought of that, and it never really connected with me that no, the Holocaust means me, right? It means my family, means intergenerational trauma. I knew lots about the Holocaust. I didn't know much about what happened in the Baltics and what happened in Lithuania specifically. And so I guess when I started looking into Yiddish for Pirates, I started really thinking about Jewishness and things like the Holocaust and persecution, and the Jew as other or not other, or whatever that, and started looking in, examining that, and kind of my tradition and my oral tradition, and of course the Holocaust is large in that. And so this, specifically for this book, I started looking into family history and looking into what had happened in Lithuania, and I interviewed a cousin that my grandfather had found. He was an old man. He was in his 90 by the time I spoke to him in Chicago, and he talked about literally walking out of Lithuania as an 8-year-old boy to escape. And so I guess all that process of actually, I was in my 50s, understanding something about where do I really finally reckoning with who I am and where I come from, and what is the history of my family and of Jewish people from Ashkenazi Jews from that. I hadn't really reckoned with it. My kids had bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvah, and thinking about, okay, I'm asking them to do this, or I'm inviting them to do this. What does that mean? And so I didn't finally reckon with the history and the identity till about 10 years ago.
That's interesting, right? Because growing up, you grew up in Northern Ireland for a while as well.
Yeah, I was there till I was 9.
And then
I certainly was aware of being a Jew and being...
You were?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a story I tell. I remember I was in grade school, and there's 500 kids, and there's 2 Jews, me and my brother. And they used to do you remember, I don't know if you saw, they used to tell stories with little felt boards.
Right.
They would do the kind of Sunday school thing, but they did it in the whole class, but about the Jesus story. And here's a camel, and here's a cross, and here's Jesus. Here are the Jews who killed Jesus. And I remember looking at finding my brother, and the rest. It's like, oh my God, what do we do? What do we be cool, right?
Head for the exits.
Yeah, and just really being aware of just in that moment particularly, but just in general, being aware of being different. There was certainly the religious Catholic Protestant thing going on in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, it's interesting because I grew up, I was born in Morocco.
Right.
I'm Sephardic. I'm not Ashkenazi.
Yes.
And we lived in the Muslim world.
Right.
And took our cues from that, where the Christ killer narrative wasn't there. It wasn't part of our lives. So we didn't have that same, at any minute now they're going to turn. But even when I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to imagine what it would be like to have been in a culture where you're going to be in trouble one day or another.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. I should say I didn't feel that because they were too busy. Catholics and Protestants were too busy doing their own. Yeah, the Jews were just but just a sense of being other. When I thought about it more, there were all these and lovely traditions. Like Christmas was an incredible thing. It was really beautiful, and with all those culturally Christian things that Ireland is infused with. But we did some of those things because they were lovely. We went and we sung carols around the Christmas tree in the little village that we lived in because it was really lovely. Mm. But I was also aware that this was, I was like cosplay. It wasn't actually, my tradition. I was able to partake of that. And even being Irish, because my parents were from South Africa. So we were I've thought a lot about that. What is it to be other, and what is it, and then what is it to be, to be in the presence of, how would I say it? Seeing the other to the other, so South Africans, Jews, seeing, about Black Africans and what was their relationship? They were other, but then the Black Africans were considered further marginalized, right?
Right. Yeah, it's the otherness informs the art, does it not?
No, absolutely, it does. And and I would say I certainly have identified more over the years, not so much with Jewish otherness, but with as a writer, being not being interested in experimental traditions, not um, being interested in, well, as you said, like not the patriarchy, not capitalism. Really thinking of myself as an outsider to the mainstream culture, and that was my role as a writer. And then I was then
And you don't
thinking
think
about
your Jewishness entered into your unconsciously or subtly into your mindset as
no, I think
already
no,
being another?
I no, I do think so, and Jewishness I mean, for a number of reasons. I think that's a really good point because so my family, Lithuanians, moved to South Africa. My grandparents moved to South Africa. Then my parents moved to Northern Ireland, where I grew up, and then we moved to Canada. So we were always we were always other in some way. I mean, I don't want to claim the kind of marginalization that people like people of color or that
Hmm.
even more, but I mean certainly an awareness of not of being other. I remember even my daughter at our local Hamilton school, she came back and said, well, we did a Christmas thing, and then they said, and now for our Jewish friends. And then it's like, and she was like 9 years old or 8 years old, and she goes, okay, wait, that's patronizing, I get what that's about. So yeah, no, I do think so. And also those, I mean, other that so we the reason that we were in those places was by being other was by virtue of our history, right? Once I thought
Right,
about it,
right.
and why do I not know Yiddish? Because my grandpa, because of that history of moving, and so I grew up in Ireland as a result of historical reasons, and so of course, I didn't grow up with my grandparents, or I didn't grow up in a coherent, Jewish environment like I might have, if we had stayed in Lithuania, I suppose.
Right.
Although I guess Russia, the Soviet Union, that's a whole other
Yeah,
narrative.
yeah, that's a whole other narrative.
Um, but yeah, absolutely. So I do think there's that, and then I realized more and more that there's different ways of being Jewish, and there's lately a kind of um, a renewed interest in Jewishness from a kind of place of maybe um, um, a renewed way thinking about like the kind of radical Jewishness. I think of there's a whole bunch of poets and musicians who think about Jewishness as a kind of a radical positionality, and then
What do you explain that a bit to me?
so in terms of the people I'm thinking about, like someone say like John Zorn, the musician,
Right.
or there's a bunch of poets, say Charles Bernstein, the American poet. He's got that great line. People ask me if I'm an observant Jew. He says, yes, I pay very close attention. And in a way, right, like it's saying like, okay, there's all these strains of Jewishness that are not, yeah, okay, so they don't have payas and they're not that kind of observant Jew, but that kind of philosophical approach and interested in inquiry and a tradition, like you said, a kind of maybe a sense of always of questioning of belief in dialogue and belief in I see it like in the kind of Talmudic thing about there's not one answer, there's like the text is surrounded by a multiplicity of voices that are in
Right.
inquiry, and
But let me stop you for a second there,
yeah.
because at the beginning I spoke about the four worlds that we live in, and
Mhm.
one of the things my path has entered into Jewish renewal. I'm a mashpia, a spiritual director in the Jewish renewal movement,
Mm.
and embodied Judaism is part of that. And part of what the work entails with people, I find, is the safe haven is your head.
Mm.
Think your way through your Judaism, think your way through your life. But the hard pieces are the heart, the
Okay.
body,
Yeah.
and the ability to be available to what is already all around you. In the spiritual realm. But what we're good at is the head. Like how many angels on the head of a pin?
Right.
Every rabbi can tell you, the tetragram. They can tell you the three letter root of that word, which could mean this or could mean that.
Right.
And you can sit with Talmud all day, and it's wonderful exercise. But what I worry about is that we lose the ability to feel our spiritual life within those sort of hallways and bookshelves.
You know what I guess what I I'm really glad that we are talking about this, because I don't think I've ever actually spoken about this, despite having been infused in writing all this Jewish stuff and creating Jewish um, work. But what I guess I came to understand is many of my kind of avant-garde pursuits um, were actually profoundly connected to a sense of Jewish discovery and maybe spiritual discovery too. So the idea, the belief in paradox, in questioning, in a kind of almost a mystical approach to language and expression, and which I think is about being in the world, right? I mean, we, thinking about Hebrew letters, about they somehow, the more you play with the letters or art, basically, the more you work with, I said, the writing knows more than you do, the more you play with that. That's a profoundly kind of spiritual, and it starts intellectually in the brain, but of course it leads you, I think, bodily and physically, and physically and spiritually, and like through the heart, into inquiry and into being open to possibility, I think, which is, I think, a spiritual practice, right? The kind of deep
Absolutely.
questioning.
And when I read what you wrote in this book, the sort of flow, the effortless flow between prose and poetry that keeps infusing the narrative of the book, where just when I think you're just going to tell me something, you add something in a poetic way that makes the whole thing change its shape, how I'm seeing it, right? And I love that. And I'm confounded by it. It's like, come on, just speak to me. Tell me something. What are you messing with my head for? But then I have to roll back into it, being available to the imagery that's coming up. But you're mixing that with something that, so at one point, and I should say for people, by the way, I'm talking to Gary Barwin, and we're talking about Nothing the Same, Everything Haunted, the Ballad of Motl, the Cowboys' latest book. But I will say, I'm going to say something about what physically happens in the Holocaust that might be a trigger for some people, so they should know that. But I remember reading William Shire's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which is a remarkable historical document because it was written a mere 10 years after the war ends, and he had been in Berlin at the start of the war. But at one point, he points out that we tend to think of Jews being exterminated in gas chambers, but that was not the first few years of the war. It was literally machine gunning people to death, putting people in pits and machine gunning them to death by the thousands. And in the book, that happens a few times. I have to be able to write about that. What did it bring up in you to have to not just research, but then turn into prose and poetry what you're telling us?
I foolishly, I didn't think about the emotional cost of that, or what, how it would feel to do that. But I mean, researching some of these things, I was absolutely shuddering, and just about, not only about the general history, but also I specifically, some of those things happened to my family.
Yeah.
And the family of people that I love, So that, I mean, it was.
Well, this
sorry,
dog.
My dog's. It's that hallowed spiritual practice of Purelator arriving at the door. So I should, that we're talking about the Holocaust, but I'm looking at Purelator, and beyond that, their neighbors have got a bouncy castle for their children, and
oh my,
this rich cultural life that we lead. But well, I mean, in a way, that's kind of like, it's we live with such contradiction and paradoxes all the time, and so writing about the Holocaust was sorry about all these crazy dogs, but so I should just say, because my wife is a criminal lawyer, and she's in court from home, and so if the dogs go nuts, I guess that's why she's not intercepting them. The judges are not happy because, it's one thing for a podcast, it's another thing for like somebody's being sentenced for, attempted murder.
Yeah.
And they say, well, but one judge said, well, I don't normally like dogs in court, but if they have to be, as long as they tell the truth. Which is a good line.
That is a good line.
No, I mean, it was deeply, deeply disturbing and deeply moving. And also I really thought about how did people make it through? Like, what does that mean? I mean, yes, of course, the people, I mean, it's horrifying. Well, how could people do such a thing? Absolutely. I'm trying to imagine being one of those people being, either side in the situation, and really, because they're, I mean, we humans, what does it mean for we human, and how do we get to a place that makes any sense, or that's the way to go, or that you find yourself as a victim, but or you find yourself as a perpetrator, either a Nazi or a Lithuanian who are complicit. And then also, how do people manage to make it through with that legacy, and to really think about that. And a lot of the book is about how do my characters make it through somehow, one way or another.
But it took a toll on you.
Oh, very, yeah, profoundly. But I would also say, I mean, I think it's both. It took a great toll, and it was, I mean, in terms of, well, great. It was really difficult. But at the same time, I guess I was also unbelievably inspired by how people somehow make it through. And I don't mean like, okay, we like look at the gumption of humankind. I don't mean that. It's like, despite the pain, despite the horror, despite, the trauma, people keep going. Like, we humans keep going. Like, I don't mean that productively.
But think about your grandfather who wouldn't talk about it because that it's not going to, in his, and this is so common, but this is not going to keep me going if I have to keep talking about it. But the other part to me was, if you're writing something like this, which means you have to allow yourself to feel it when you're writing it, then you go out onto the street, on your way to Zarky's to pick up some, bananas because you're out of bananas. You look at people and think, who are we? Like, who are we? Are we fooling ourselves to think we're better than this? How do we devolve into this kind of darkness where we can literally murder each other, and even if we're the good guys, we'll take the chance of leaving people behind and letting them die. I mean, like going to war as a veteran and coming home and just saying, but it's insane what I just did. I was just in a war. I was supposed to kill people, and now it's like, oh, let's go out to a restaurant. Like, how do you square that?
But I also see that as something remarkable, right? Like, not just, I did something awful and now I'm going to go on, but we somehow keep going, and we're able to love and able to be creative and able to have joy despite the many difficult and dark things, and we're able to be kind and also sometimes people aren't all one thing. I guess that's the other thing, right?
Right.
And it not in time, and not at the moment. And it is complicated. And yes, we humans, and I absolutely take us as part of, I don't say, well, I'm a Jew and that happened to us, and therefore I absolutely, we all are us, right?
Think about the places you've been, right? South Africa, Northern Ireland, Indigenous people in Canada, right? And I always, growing up as a Jewish kid, would say, this isn't a lesson just about us. It's a lesson about humanity. And our responsibility is to all of humanity to not have this happen.
Yeah. So, and one thing I really wanted to think about with the Holocaust was not the kind of exceptionality that the Holocaust is the only genocide. It is its own particular and unique thing, absolutely. But so is every other genocide in its own way. And not that, well, okay, look, don't, that means we just have to concentrate on anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. No. We should be more called to look into injustice and to genocides and to other kinds of persecution and oppression, which many Jews have risen to that occasion. Absolutely. Right. And so I thought about it a lot when I wrote my first novel, Yiddish for Pirates, about, there were some relatives of mine who were talking about, who were really racist. They were South Africans, and they were racist. It's like, wait a second, you just came out of Lithuania and you escaped because of anti-Semitism, and we know what happened there. And now you don't make the connection that here you are perpetrating a like this system in South Africa. So what is it to be, that's that being the other, and then people are further other. So then in my story I made, when the Jews who came with in Yiddish for Pirates, Jews came with Columbus. And there were some Jews who went with Columbus, or if they were conversos, but they were Jews. They came with Columbus. And then if they encountered indigenous people, what was their attitude to these people who are even more other than them? Like, what is their moral responsibility? And I really thought a lot about that, and what are we called to as Jews in our moral responsibility, just generally, but also maybe specifically as a result of our history of persecution. Like all our holidays are about persecution, right? I mean,
yeah, they tried to kill us. They didn't succeed. Let's eat. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. So, absolutely. Right. But, even that joke, well, there's two things about that joke. One is I also understood something about Jewish oral tradition, which is also jokes and stories and teaching, which I was listening to a lot of indigenous writers talking about their, this rich heritage of oral tradition and it's like, oh, what are my practices? I mean, other than the very religious things. Oh, right. My father-in-law tells all these terrible Jewish jokes and tells all these stories. That's my oral tradition. And it is. And those things are, yeah. And, if you go hear a rabbi, they'll often start with a joke, right? It's the same. It is part, what's a teaching story and what's a joke and it's all part of that. And it's packed into culture and sort of understand that. But I also think that thing where you said, they tried to kill us, let's eat. Well, there's also that somehow people are able to find ways to keep going, to find joy, to find resilience, to find community, to find connection, or maybe overeating, right? I mean, you talk about the story of, Passover, you're sitting around a table with everybody you love and sharing food, right? That's what you're doing, right? And they tried to kill us, but here we are. There's a great little YouTube video of it. It was a guy, a survivor. He was in Auschwitz, and so I don't know if you've seen this. He's at the gates of Auschwitz. This old man survivor with his daughter and with his grandchildren, and they're dancing at the gates to Auschwitz, and they're dancing to Gloria Gaynor's "I Will Survive." And it's like it's so cloying, but it's like I'm a survivor. Here I am with my grandchildren. You didn't, and it's this sort of. It's just sort of a terrible joke, right? I mean, that he's there and will survive. And but first of all, it's his right to recognize his experience however he wants. But it's that kind of ironic, joyful, ridiculous survival resilience, engage, actually looking at the thing. And actually, I think one of the things that, I paraphrased that scene in my book with somebody talking about coming back to Lithuania with their grandchildren and having survived. Now I've just forgotten what I was going to say, but I think that.
Well, let me just for a second. The idea, in some ways, it's. I once blurted out at a talk, being Jewish is an act of spite. Right? It's just in this relentless desire to rid the world of Jews. We're still here. And in the book, you weave that in with the indigenous ability to say, you tried just about everything to kill us, and we're still here.
Yes.
And you made a very conscious relationship between those experiences of the indigenous North American and the wandering Jew. And then you sewed into it this crazy cowboy narrative.
Yes.
That it also includes the fact that the Germans loved the Western and Hitler loved Karl May.
Yeah, and specifically, Karl May is this. He was the best-selling. I think maybe he still is best-selling German fiction writer. The best-selling book other than the Bible, I think. Wow. And so it was beloved of many, many Germans, and many Germans and Central Europeans still dress up as indigenous people and go to these like cosplay powwows. They still do it. It's kind of an amazing thing. And
that'd be a great documentary.
Yeah, there is a great documentary. Actually,
is there on that?
It's amazing. Drew Hayden Taylor.
Yeah, I love Drew. He's been on the show.
And so there's one scene that he does. It's so great so he's an indigenous guy, and he's like looking out. He's dressed in just regular, regular North American clothing, and he's looking at the camera like, what? As he's standing beside these German guys dressed in feathers and and he's like, I'm the indigenous guy. What's going on? It's great, and he does it with this beautiful irony. And in fact, Drew and I have talked about Jewish humor and indigenous humor, and exactly that, about how, in the face of adversity, we are able to make it through, and how we use humor as a way of dealing with it, as a way of unpacking, speaking truth to power and to pomposity, but also to unpack things and to and as ways of yeah, being resilient. I mean, and humor as that. Oh, and I know the other thing I was going to say was, um, I have listened a lot to Indigenous writers the last little while, reading like many great writers like Drew, um, and talking about, well, both intergenerational trauma, but also talking about finding your own traditions, and finding what do your own traditions look like, and that led me to all these as one of the things it did was led me to all these Jewish traditions, storytelling traditions and humor. Um, um, so
Do you read Shalom Aleichem?
yeah, oh yes, absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah,
because
uh,
I feel it in some of your writing about this, because there's just at the moment where it's the least appropriate, it's absurd,
yeah,
right?
absolutely right, and no, I mean, and I take that as like a philosophical system, like as a way of dealing with the world. It's how Jews have dealt. The Yiddish saying is it man plans and God laughs,
Right.
right? And so, like, okay, that's we and which and my other piece of Jewish wisdom that I think about is I remember with my kids asked on the Passover on the Seder plate, there's two bitter herbs. It's like, okay, well, why, I get one is okay. Life was hard with, what's the second one? So we looked it up. And I guess one of the traditional rabbi answers is, why is there a second one? So children will ask questions,
Hmm.
which I loved. It's a joke,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah, yeah.
also, but it's also really profound. And to me, that is at the center of it. The other thing I think about was, I remember my one of my sons was walking with the rabbi. He was going to do tashlich, dropping the
Dropping,
spreading the sins with bread onto the water at Yom
right.
Kippur with the local rabbi and my in-laws. So there they were there, and so my son turns to the rabbi in the presence of his grandfather and says, "So I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't even believe in God." And my grandfather's holding his heart, like, oh my God, you can't go say that to the rabbi. And the rabbi was, really wise. It was Rabbi Zeplowitz when he was here at
Right.
Anshe Shalom. And he said, well, do you want to make the world a better place? And so my son said, yes. He said, well, that's believing in God, which I guess is also a traditional rabbinical answer. And I really
Yeah.
love that, because it's like, let's get to the heart of what this is. And also all of those things I think of as, those are ways of telling a story, as well as those are beliefs and ways of thinking about being in the world. That's a particular Jewish way. And so to me, I try and take some of those approaches when I'm telling a story.
Yeah. It's interesting. The Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi is kind of the founder of the renewal movement in North America, and kind of a mixture of Hasidic Judaism and Eastern mysticism,
Mm.
and reinventing prayer, reinventing the whole idea of why you're there. And in the spiritual direction work, some of the work I do, somebody will say, "Look, let's to be clear, I don't believe in God." And I say, because Reb Zalman taught us this, was, well, tell me about the God you don't believe in.
Right.
And then we have a conversation. And
Right.
it usually ends up that they don't believe in a man with a big white beard sitting on a throne like chair
A Santa Claus. We know that. That's right.
with a
Yeah.
naughty and nice list.
Yes.
And that pediatric version of God can't serve a person as they reach adolescence even. So you get the old Jewish joke of, Rabbi, there's mice in the sanctuary. How do you get rid of them? Just put keepers on them, give them a bar mitzvah, you'll never see them
Yeah.
again.
Yeah. No, I love that joke. Yeah. No, absolutely.
But that's what it is how do we then reclaim in our own life a spiritual life, be it whatever the framework that it's in, if it's Judaism, if it's, the other part of this is in our secular culture. If I've noted that when we speak of indigenous people, we tend to infuse it with a kind of nostalgic spirituality, that they
Mm.
have elders and wisdom and sage and smudging, and
Yeah.
yet we won't do that. We would appear foolish if I walked down the street in a kaftan and Moroccan slippers
Right.
and my kippah on my head. People would go, well, that guy's nuts. What's he
Yeah.
doing out here like that? So we've lost the ability to clothe and revere our spiritual life in a public way. It's something, you kind of keep to yourself if you're going to do it at all.
But I would say that I feel that I have, not only by studying Jewish things, but in looking, thinking about this book and thinking about um, indigenous writers and thinking about what they're talking, indigenous people, about what does spirituality look like. Well, it may be irreverent and spirituality and culture, which are fused together.
Yeah.
What does it look like? Well, it doesn't necessarily look like you're gathered in rows in a a place of worship. It's you're hanging out with your your auntie, it's a way of being in the world. It's community. It's and it's the way you think of the world and your relationships to the world as well as to people. And so what are the Jewish versions of that I connect with, right? So I don't wear a kippah, I don't go to synagogue, but I feel profoundly connected in a Jewish way to that world. I may not say that I believe in God, but I would.
So how do you do it without community?
Well, I have family, and I have, I guess, an engagement with tradition and with Jewish things. I mean, I think it's all, I love the idea of all of that, of community, but I mean, I think, my local synagogue is doing it all right, but it's just not something that
Well, this is the crisis of organized religion. Is
right.
That it needs to become disorganized religion for a while, and Jewish innovation is an important thing, and all innovation in spiritual life is, to me, the crisis is if you interrupt somebody in the middle of a prayer on a Saturday morning in a synagogue, and say, "Do you know what you're doing? Like, do you know what you're saying even?"
Yeah.
And quite honestly, and God love them all, they'd say, no, I don't. But it's important to speak gibberish together every Saturday and then have kiddush and eat, right?
Right. No, I get that. And I also, but even for me, even thinking of like the tunes, the melodies, the letter, I don't speak Hebrew, but the letters they open up to me a kind of a spiritual connection, a tradition. I mean, I find that really, I find that really profound. And so for me, I mean, I think of my Jewishness. Yes, I have a connection with some Jewish people that I know. And in that sense, there's some kind of disorganized community connection. But for me, it's more about family and more about my own engagement. And that works for me. And
and we all find our path. I mean, like,
right.
One thing I'm finding interesting about the pandemic situation is the online synagogue has come to life. So there's one in New York, Romamu, which is a wonderful congregation of renewal people, which always, before the pandemic, was online every Saturday morning and every Friday night. But they now have way more people who are saying, I didn't want to leave my house. I didn't want to be part of all that. But what I would say about synagogues and community, even though I find myself very rarely going anymore, I do, my own way, the way you do.
Yeah.
But I would say that I always talk about the guy in one of my sessions who said afterwards, prayer means nothing to me. And I don't believe in God. And he was at the time the president of the synagogue that I was talking about. And I said, well, I don't understand. Why are you coming every Saturday? Because you have to come every Saturday. You're the president.
Yeah, exactly.
And he said, I come for kiddush. And I'm not being glib. I come for afterwards be able to eat with everybody and just see my community and see people grow up and people get married and people live and people die. And I'm part of all that. And John Terpstra, who I spoke to about why he goes to church every Sunday, and a wonderful poet and writer in Hamilton here. And he said exactly the same thing. He says, I live this community of people. And do I get to choose them all? No. Are some of them people I don't even like? Yeah.
Yeah,
but that's the challenge of community. We're so self-selective now that everybody's got to be somebody we really like, or it's not on.
No, absolutely no.
Modification.
Yeah, I hear absolutely all of that. I mean, to me, in a way, a community for that matter is my father-in-law emailing me a terrible joke, right? Like
Right.
that, like it honestly, like I feel like we're connecting. It's specifically a kind of a Jewish humor, and it's a specific. It's my father-in-law, and he's connected to, he
Yeah,
goes
yeah,
to
yeah.
it, all of that, and so I deeply feel that, and I guess I've come to understand that, and even in my children, in their way of engaging with their Jewishness and politics, and it is, ideas about Palestine, and all of that is
Yeah.
about, they're part of this, and they see that as part of this larger narrative of who they are. And I think, and one thing I really like about the kind of basic idea of Jewishness is that, or Judaism is, I mean, there's not a pope to tell you what the rules are. You can
Right.
claim it how you want, and you can invent it. And in fact, the invention is, in fact, like questioning being Jewish. You're never more Jewish than when you're questioning being Jewish.
Exactly.
Like that's, and I really, and profoundly, I'm moved by that. I would say I've thought a lot about ritual. Like I don't go to synagogue, but much, but when I do, especially, I love very traditional shuls. Not that I would mostly believe in their,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
patriarchal stuff, but like when I hear like all these old guys, like
Yeah.
all of that stuff, I so love that. And I don't know what they're saying. I mean, I have a sense of it but I love, it's a couple things I like about it. It's what's heterophonic, so it's a bunch of people saying things in a disorganized way, so that it's weaving in and out. They're not all singing. They're not in lockstep. Um, and so they're individuals, but they're also together. They're beside, side by side. But what weaving in this thing, the chant itself connects me to ancient traditions and this otherness, the kind of music.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like Bach. There's a different scale. There are different ways of thinking about melody and well, not harmony, melody and rhythm. And so that to me is that ritual enactment of that tradition is really deeply moving to me, along with the actual Hebrew letters and
You
all
know,
of that.
you know, you just described basically the first time I listened to Ornette Coleman.
Well, yeah, exactly right. So for me, I'm actually I just got a grant to write an essay, which is John Coltrane was my bar mitzvah teacher, which is
No, great.
because when I was studying for my bar mitzvah, I had also started playing saxophone, and I was obsessed with Coltrane. And a couple of things. One is not only specifically musically, solo lines that are thinking about non-Western traditions of
Right.
modality and music. And so the textures are quite Jewish, but also the sense of how music can lead you to a sense of otherness. And for me, I mean, one thing I think, to begin to have some understanding of people that were different. I was a little suburban Jewish boy in Ottawa, Ontario, and
Yeah.
here I was listening to Coltrane playing music that was a profound expression of his spirituality as a Black man who came from the South in state, all of that. And it's like, oh, you mean that these art and music and tradition can lead us into these deep spiritual places? And I was deeply moved by his music, knowing that I was very, very different than him. But also we had this, like, I felt this connection, right, with this other human
Yeah,
being.
yeah, yeah.
And I understood how that Jewish tradition, all the chanting, how that also led me there too, rather than, oh man, I don't want to do this. This is mainstream. This is what I'm told to do. This is what,
Right, right.
I'm supposed to do, because my parents told me I'm supposed to be a good Jewish boy and study and and taking on all of that. Well, no. It was actually a portal to profound, a profound experience of spirituality in my own way. And from that, a connection with, I guess, I mean, not to be too cheesy about it, but with cultures of the world.
Yeah, no, because
But
look, we're all singing the same song in our own way,
right,
right? I mean, it's the song of being human. It's the song of being here, right?
right, no, absolutely. And how that is a deep, and in a way, it was the first glimmer of, oh right, these things are deep expressions of what it is to be human. Even the lockstep Bach chorales, if once you get that that's what it's actually about, it's not about an enforcement of the heteropatriarchal capitalism, Eurocentric, whatever. I mean, it is that too, but it's also in a religious way. I mean, he meant it
Yeah, yeah,
deeply.
yeah. Well, that the key to me in reading your book was you could look at each of these pieces on its surface and say, well, that doesn't fit with that. And this is, no, he's that. I get what you can defend yourself against it, or you can let yourself sink into the sincerity of it. That in all of this story, there is a, a, a leitmotif of survival, of what it is to survive, and how a person could possibly even move from survival to thriving,
No, no,
and how some don't. They just,
no. Oh, absolutely right, and the whole range. I because I don't want to think. Oh, it's like there are those resilient Jews and they made it through, and that. Like,
no,
no, no, no. Even the people who did make it through and who are thriving at serious cost, and they carry that, that sorrow, that pain with them. It's people don't or very few people do anyway.
yeah,
Uh,
oh yeah. I don't know what I would like when I try to put myself into that existence. My best friend when I was growing up, his mother was Estonian, and she literally walked out of
yeah,
Estonia and
yeah,
had a scar in her leg from a bullet that hit her in the leg on the way out, literally on the way out the door.
yeah.
And they were Greek Orthodox of all things.
Hmm.
So there was the otherness can never stop. You can always add another layer of otherness. Like I'm a Sephardic Jew. 3% of North American Jews are
Right,
Sephardic, right?
right.
So
Yes,
I'm the other in Judaism in my own environments in Toronto and in Hamilton. There are very few. I once hosted Canada Day at Parliament Hill for the CBC, and on me and my co-host was from Quebec because you had to have one French, one English as the
right,
hosts. And
right.
it was Sonia Benezra, who is a
Ah,
Spanish, like me, not even a French Moroccan from the south of Morocco. Her parents were also from Tangiers, like mine. And so she
ah.
was a Spanish Moroccan Jew. So what were the odds that
Yeah,
two
that,
Spanish Moroccan Jews would host Canada Day in front of 100,000
oh,
people
that's so great.
on the lawn of Parliament Hill? And we had the best time
Uh,
speaking Spanish to each other, talking about the foods we loved and how we eat,
right.
and how she had to learn French in Quebec. And the other Moroccans, she wasn't even them, because the other Moroccans were all from Casablanca and Rabat and Fez and Marrakesh, and they could speak French, right? And
Right.
my parents could speak French. My siblings. I was 2 when I came here, so
Oh, I
I
see.
you
Right.
know I kept telling my mother, why didn't we move to the U.S. where I could speak Spanish all the time, and it would have been easy because that's what we spoke in the house. But the otherness can continue forever. It is the things that keep us together. Those pieces that make us human, not Jewish, human, not Lithuanian, that are going to keep us alive. I think and the book helped me with that a bit.
No, I'm really glad. I mean, and I found there's a line I quote Cherie Dimelane, the Indigenous writer, and she says we were talking about the book and talking about the connections between Indigenous genocide and the Holocaust and some of the research that I did, where because Hitler modeled some of the Holocaust, he learned specifically
Yeah.
from what happened to Indigenous, in Indigenous North America, and she said, "Oh yeah, we're genocide buddies." And like I would
Wow.
never have said that. I would never be so just have this sort of like what disrespectful, but it's like, oh right. And just the idea that she I guess, with like that kind of deep kind of compassion, I guess that connection. It's like, okay, well, we understand what that means, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like we've experienced that, and so have you. And she really saw that, and like, so we have our own specifics of our own culture and our own history. But yes, we are in this together, as and we
Mm.
understand, and all these different kinds of connections that we have with different people in different circumstances, I guess, right? And I think that is, yeah, I mean, it's a truism, but it's a profound truism that we need to continue to renew to understand, and then to tease out some of the specifics of how all of those things play out and what does that mean. I think because I know one thing I did really want to say was, talking about my grandparents who did not address the Holocaust. I really think that for me, the only way to address things is to move through them and to understand. I'm not speaking to people who have pain that I can't understand, and people need to do what they need to do. But for me, the only way to um, really address, things that are overwhelmingly horrific is to kind of look them in the eye and somehow find a way to make it
Yeah.
through and to talk it through.
I spoke to an old friend of mine who used to work at the CBC and then went on to work for the American networks on the show, Jeffrey Kaufman. And we were talking about, as journalists, your job is to keep your eyes open when everybody else is closing them or looking away,
Yeah, no,
right? But that it takes its toll, that
oh
that
no, no question that it does. But and as a journalist, you are a witness to many more things than your own particular experience.
yeah,
I mean,
which
that's
which is
professionally.
it's the gift, but it's also something that you know you just really like.
Yeah,
It's so difficult to stick with the stuff that hurts, and it's so difficult to stick with the stuff that's so highly problematic. So I've spent more than a decade doing communications on environmental issues,
hmm.
and it's still bedeviling. What is it I have to say that's going to make you go, oh, okay, all right,
Yeah,
let's do something here, real, like
yeah,
profound, real,
yeah,
and as a wordsmith, it drives you crazy. You're just like, how about this phrase? How about this one?
yeah.
And yet it just doesn't seem to work. And there's a wonderful book by a guy named Marshall on Don't Even Think About It, about how difficult it's been for him over the years to communicate those things. And when it comes to things like the Holocaust, when you see people, I hosted a anti-Semitism Zoom in the States last week with an organization I work with down there. And, they're dealing with Jews will not replace us,
Yeah.
and staff Camp Auschwitz, at the January 6th Capitol Hill riot. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, these things are still real, and yet the Jewish thing is to try to get past those things and become part of the power, become part of the establishment in many ways. When and then every time we gravitate towards that, it's like it's just a rental.
Right. You're only not Jewish, or yeah, you're only one of them until you're not, I think.
Yeah,
But I just think in general, the more, I mean, we have to look difficult things and be aware of them, like not always have them foremost on our mind necessarily. We can't, it's hard to live like that, but
yeah,
to live with the whole, but I think that not to just tuck away things in recesses or in archives. I think we need to, I mean, not, um, I'm talking about everything, but to confront. I think that there's otherwise to confront the difficult things in our own lives. I mean, I think that's the only way to be healthy. Not even in terms of intergenerational trauma. I mean, I think it's important. I think there was a shadow in my family's life about not dealing with it and
right.
not being aware. And and I can't, and again, I'm not judging anybody. I'm just, this is an understanding that for me to really try and think through some of these things is really important, because I think you're a healthier, more integrated human, and we are a healthier, more integrated culture, like self-integrated within ourselves.
What would your grandfather say about this book?
You know what? That's a really great question. I think that he would be really moved, honestly, that I know this was the most important thing to him. And
Mm,
I actually spoke about it. And I think I spoke about it with a deep love of Jewish tradition, and in all the ways, humor, as well as history, as well as mysticism, as well as, you know, uh, kind of Jewish learning, of Lithuanian Jewry, all of that. I think those were
yeah.
things that were very profound for him, and to ask those questions. My grandmother too, for that matter. I remember her telling me, when she was close to 90, and she was very arthritic, and I helped her like move from the couch to the table to eat, and which took 15 minutes just to move those, because she was very. And while I was doing that, she told me that she was in Lithuania, and then they had moved to Ukraine before they left, and she was describing how she saw bodies, and it was all this, and she said, and when she was 18, and that's when she stopped believing in God, she told me.
Mm,
um, and just that story about like that kind of having dealt with such terrible things, but yet moving on, yet being very Jewish, I mean, that was that whole paradoxical, I don't believe in God, but of course I'm deeply Jewish, and of course I want to be.
yeah.
And she, like, that was being profoundly Jewish, just in a different way. And I think she also would understand the work I've done, that is deeply Jewish and completely infused with a sense of Jewish culture and Jewish being in the world, which is through the humor, through the stories, through the way storytelling, through a kind of Jewish epistemology, let's say.
Yeah.
I think that they would both really get that and be really be moved. And my father-in-law has all of a sudden, my father-in-law, he was always like, "Oh, Gary, I like your writing. You're so talented," but he didn't really mean it until now, until these books, which I think he really gets, right? Like now, because I'm talking about. I mean, there are tributes to him and his cronies, right? And the kibbutz singing stories and that kind of deep sense of Jewish identity that they feel, and I certainly learned from that.
So I mean, there's that thing you said in there about that's when she decided not to believe in God, and I always think of, the guy sitting on the bench with Jesus and saying, "How could you have let this happen? How could you have let things like the Holocaust? How could you let people kill each other the way they do in these wars? Where are you? Like, how could you do this?" And then Jesus says, "It's funny. I was just about to ask you the same question." Right? Because it's not about God. For me, is just a placeholder for the unknowable and for the unbelievableness of what I'm sitting in the middle of in a dirt ball in the middle of a galaxy that's just a little joke in the trillions of stars that are out there. Right. I'm not. It's not a transactional. Hey God, how's it going for me?
Right. Yeah. Right? Like the buddy Jesus they have, right? Like what's it? God's, he's the kind of guy who thinks of everything on a date. Yeah. But I mean, I think, we're also really profoundly metaphorical. We think in images, we humans. And so whatever that looks like, I mean, to me, it looks like a big question. The world is this interaction, this question, this engagement about I mean, it's like so new. That to me is that deepest expression of what it is to be spiritual. But I think some people have a more or less specific ways of thinking about it, about being in the world, and so they use these metaphors. And I loved what you said about not only religion as a sense, organized religion and going to practice as a place of community, but also as a way of kind of working out like a specific iteration of your spirituality that you can then manifest. But I also feel that for me, there's many other ways of doing that, like writing music.
Yeah, of course. But the thing is, if we don't find sustainable pieces, you have a prayerful practice. It's called writing and composing and creating art. That's your prayerful practice. I mean, your life to me is a prayer.
Yeah.
Right. Life itself, your life, this time, this moment, have no idea what was happening before. I do think there are, it's not you. I have a soul. I am a soul. And that, and the soul's work is to come to consciousness and to be useful. And not to be a cancerous cell in the body of the universe, but to be a healthy cell, and the tikkun olam, the justice of the world, to do something for people, but to do something in a cleaner way, to clean your container and try to be useful to people. That to me is, I don't care how you do it. I don't care if you think I'm a religious person, a non-religious person. It's whether or not you're conscious enough to care about life itself and the sacredness of it all. I mean, where we live. Yesterday, I was up in Ancaster walking a trail at the Hermitage, which was just lovely, lovely, and I'm available. But when I was 20, it was take some acid, get in on the cosmic joke for an evening, get in on it, and the unity of everything. But then the next morning, you wake up feeling like crap and you're back to the banal and the mundane, and that's just that. So to me, it's how do you sustain those things? And in your case, it is through your art and your work, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I reading a bit about kind of Kabbalistic thought and about how the Torah is a finite document that's infinitely interpretable because it's an expression of an infinite reality, infinite divinity, and which is also a stand-in for the world, is also a finite expression of an infinite reality. So for me, that's, not only specifically through language, but specifically through examining the world, and that's where you can find the sense of everything, right? And so I guess that's true. I mean, my practice is to think. Without sounding pretentious, because also part of the practice is not being pretentious about it, but being open to the ridiculous farce and paradox and all of that, because I think that's really important. To think I know something, but to really, to feeling like I'm in a position of inquiry all the time. That to me, that's the profoundest thing I've learned from, I guess, my engagement with Judaism over the last 10 years, is to just really think about that, to think about questioning, to think about being open, as you said, available, which is, I think it's the same thing. To question is the availability, and to know, and to not never think you actually know the answers, because.
Well, that's the Chinese. To be uncertain is uncomfortable. To be certain is ridiculous.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. And there'd be a million Jewish jokes about that exact thing, right? I mean, which is great, right? I mean, and that's what I think even the wisest Orthodox rabbis would say that, right? I mean, they may tell you specifically don't do this or don't do that, but they also are ultimately thinking about that.
Yeah, but in the Orthodox stream of it, there is a degree of certainty that I've always found problematic for me.
Yeah.
That this is, yes, there is a room to interpret ethically this or that, in the Pirkei Avot and all of that. I get it, and that's a lovely conversation. But there are certain things that are just There's no conversation.
That is true.
And it's not as much fun for me when it's like that,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was going to tell you. So my book has a religious error in it, and so this is kind of revealing to me. The book is published. There's a mistake, and I only found out because my book we published an excerpt in JewishFiction.net, and they had an editor look at it who was Jewish, and my editors weren't, and I made a mistake. So this is the error in the book. There's a scene in the book where it's Shabbat, and they bring a violin out, and they're going to dance, and it's a touching scene between my main character Motl and his parents, and he dances with them, and it's this lovely Shabbat thing. And he goes like, okay, it's Shabbat, and there's a fiddle, so we should dance. So according to orthodoxy, you're not allowed. You cannot. So, but so then I looked into it. So because I thought, well, it's a mitzvah to have sex on Shabbat, right? There's all those stories about the rabbis tying bells to their bedstead, so the whole community could hear him and the rabbits performing the mitzvah. So I thought, I mean, like, if you can make love, surely you could dance. Surely you could, but no. And what the rabbis say is, it's not that playing the violin or playing an instrument is wrong. It's not that dancing is bad. Dancing's okay. It's playing an instrument bad. And why is an instrument bad? Because you're playing and and then if it breaks, then you'll be tempted to fix it, and that's work, and you're not allowed to do it. Oh my God. And it's like, okay, come on.
It's like ants and broccoli. You're not allowed to eat broccoli because there might be insects in the broccoli. It's not kosher. I mean, come on. Halakhic law can drive a person crazy.
Well, right. But so
tear off the toilet paper in segments before Sabbath starts so you don't have to tear something.
When it gets to be that kind of legalistic ridiculousness. But to be honest, I mean, while happily ignoring it, I kind of love the ridiculous logic, because it seems like, okay, I know those men who made those rules.
Yeah, but I've always wondered. I've never done we're traditional. Sephardic people were not Orthodox. We didn't have gradations of Judaism. We didn't have Orthodox, ultra Orthodox, conservative. When we got here, it was like, wow, these people are like doing buffet Judaism. This is crazy, Oh, yeah. I go to my friend's house and open the fridge, and there'd be bacon sitting there, and I just stare at it, and the mother would walk in and
the meat dishes, the milk dishes, and the Chinese food dishes, right?
Yeah, that's right. They'd just be like, what are you doing? What do you mean? Like you can't. It's just no, you're not allowed to eat this. Because in our house, my mother, her answer to everything was, don't ask why you're doing it, just do it. Otherwise, we'll disappear. If we don't do this, and it was like, okay, I kind of get that.
Heavy. Yeah.
I kind of get that. But on the other hand, we're a questioning people. So I'm questioning my mother trying to tell me that I shouldn't be eating pork because it's unhealthy. It's like, Ma, that's like, no, that's not happening.
But Jews have been doing that for hundreds and hundreds of years, have been questioning that, and have been assimilating or not assimilating, or being
changing or changing.
Right.
It's a living, every religion can either be ossified and fossilized, or it can actually be alive. There was no such thing as a bat mitzvah, a girl's bar mitzvah,
right,
75, 80 years ago. And it was only because the Reconstructionist movement said, no, we're actually doing it. We're having girl. Now, even the Orthodox will do it in their own way on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They will have a bat mitzvah. Right. So.
No, absolutely. And I know that I had learned about, in terms of in some traditions about homosexuality, we think, well, science has changed, and we believe in when we learn something different, that kind of overrules with a new insight. And so I know
Right.
in some traditions, so like we know that it's not a choice, it's who you are, and we science now knows that, therefore
Right.
it's okay. I
So,
mean,
so, so that's the evolution of things, and it's
yeah,
the fundamentalism, like I said, spoke at the beginning about the caricature
yeah,
of these things, which is, believe me, going to Joel Osteen's prosperity theology mega church in Houston and 35,000 people coming every weekend,
wow,
that's a real eye opener. Oddly though, I was doing a feature interview with him for a television network, and there were about 4 or 5 people in that stadium, that former Houston Rockets stadium, who were wearing prayer shawls, taluses,
hmm,
while they were doing the evangelical thing, and they bugged me. Everybody else, I was like, I get this. They want family, they want community, they want to feel part of something, they want to
right,
feel that they're being heard as people. I get it. But for them, I had to stop, resist the temptation of walking up to them and going, "What are you doing? Take that
right,
off. What are you doing?
yeah, yeah.
Like, pick a lane. Like, you're either on this team or you're not on this. But don't bring this with you. That's no. You take it down." And I thought, okay, shut up, Ralph. Just sit in the corner. You're a journalist here. You're not here to correct people's behavior.
It's funny, certain things that as I say, I'm not religious. I don't believe, but like I would be spooked if a Jewish person, this, and I know this is an Ashkenazi, not a Sephardic thing, if a Jewish person named their child after somebody living, right?
Right,
That
right.
would really spook me. Or those, and it's like I know that's just super, but it's, and I wonder at myself, but those things that we are so deeply ingrained anyway, right?
Yeah.
And so we have those funny beliefs.
The otherness never ends, like we said, right? So I was in South Africa doing a 10 years after the end of apartheid
Hmm.
piece for the CBC many years ago. And I'm in Langa, which is the smallest and first township, ghetto,
Hmm.
and I'm in a shebeen, which is like a speakeasy with
Yes.
warm sorghum beer being served, which was awful. I hated it, but I'm drinking it. First of all, I see a guy who's wearing a T-shirt that's for the Sick Kids Telethon in
Of
Toronto, right?
course.
Okay, this is nuts.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sitting here in South Africa near Cape Town, and this guy's wearing a T-shirt from Sick Kids. But then another guy just keeps telling me, but I don't understand what it is to be an African. You could not possibly understand what it is to be an African. And I finally just went, well, actually, I'm African.
Right.
And he went, what? And I said, I'm African. I was born in Tangiers in Morocco. I'm from North Africa. The problem with you guys is you think you're the only people who are Africans. And we
Right.
just laughed and sat around.
Right.
And,
Nice.
and we'd leveled the playing field at that point, because I walked in as the white privilege. I walked out as the African. And I think this is crazy. We could always find a way back to each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're very different people, but we're also very the same. I mean, that's the thing, right? So I don't ever really think I know anybody's experience, but at the same time, I also do, and it's understanding that negotiation.
Well, there's there are different levels of what the soul is in Judaism, and the most profound, the true heart, is the neshama in its purest form, which cannot be violated, cannot be corrupted by the experience of your life, and that's
Mm,
the divine spark between people and between
mm,
you and everything around you. So, if you can manage to find a way to access your divine spark and do the holy listening of seeing it in someone else, their divine spark, regardless of how they're presenting themselves, then you're talking about that spiritual climb,
right. Yeah, that
right?
makes sense. Yeah,
It's a
yeah. I
lovely
mean, that's a
thing.
beautiful metaphor. I mean, it's a beautiful metaphor for that connection. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
beautiful way of framing it. Let's say, yeah, let's
Well,
say,
to me, I get what you're saying. I think metaphorically. I mean, the spiritual world is a metaphorical world, right?
yeah. Oh,
If
yeah.
you take it literally, then you just get into silliness. Like,
Right.
exactly how many yet I'll use 4 archangels for a guided meditation with someone, because I remember it when I was doing my learning as a spiritual director. I was assigned to write about angels. And I said, no, don't pick me. I think that's just silly. It's a whole
Right.
silly thing. And my rabbi, she said, first she gave me a guided meditation with angels in it. And then she said, do you see it yet? I said, okay, I'm willing to write this now,
Yeah.
because she didn't present it as anthropomorphic. She presented it as energies.
Mm.
And the different energies are represented by different namings. And then it was like, okay, so now I have a way in. And I think we're all just looking for our way in one way or another.
Yeah, we need to and we need to name feelings, or get it's some way of articulating our experiences. And so we find language, whether that's musical language or visual language or language, right? Or in
Yeah,
images
yeah,
like that,
yeah.
or, I think that's how we think as humans, right? I think that's how we try and shape the undifferentiated experience that we have inside ourselves. And so we can say, no, that's that thing, and that's that thing. And we give it names or metaphors or images or
Yeah. Well,
whatever.
and we need to. I've meant to end this interview about 8 times, but I'm just having such a good time. I will say that the only spoiler I'll do for the book is you have to be able to believe that a testicle can cause an avalanche. I'm just going to say that for people, and then they have to read the book.
We can talk about whether or not you can be agnostic, whether or not you can believe in an anthropomorphized God, but you must believe in the testicle. I just want that to be very clear.
That's right. Gary Barwin is the author of Nothing the Same, Everything Haunted, the Ballad of Motl, the Cowboy. He's also the author of Yiddish for Pirates. He is an artist, a composer, a thinker. Go to his website. What is it? What's the address of the website?
It's GaryBarwin.com.
Beautiful. Go there and you'll find all kinds of lovely journeys that you can go on. And why do you say multimedia instead of multimedia?
Oh, because they're just all like a really good melted cheese sandwich. It's all melted together. I just think I use the media, the different things I do mix into each other. They meld into each other.
Right, they're not separate windows.
Yeah.
It's a
also
bay window.
Maybe and they're on fire. No, it's
not. Folks, remember, I've just gone on Patreon. So patreon.com/NTKR, not that kind of rabbi. If you are so inclined, please, a few shekels, some kesef, a little money towards not that kind of rabbi. And I'll greatly appreciate it, because it's really wonderful to be able to do this with people and to find great guests to be with. Gary, thank you so much. And I hope the book continues to grow in its flavor and its love and in the wisdom that you share through this book. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much. This has been really fantastic to talk to you.
All right. You take
everybody
care of
out there in not that kind of rabbi land.
Let's bump into each other sometime, okay?
Sounds lovely.
Okay, you take care.
Yes.